What we found with the early versions of the model is prompt engineering is really engineering. And I remember as a software engineer coming in and going, that can't be. And then I really got into the technology and how it worked. And I was like, yeah, it really makes sense to spend a lot of time with these prompts, because if you don't, you get bad outcomes. And a lot of people's original, when they were forming their original conjecture of how AI worked and whether it was good or not, were getting these terrible results and going, I don't see what the point is here. I don't see why we would use this. And a big chunk of what we did over the last couple of years, 24, 23, and early 25, was learn that how you tell the AI to give you an answer was incredibly important.
Welcome to Modern Logic for Your Business. I'm your host, Andy Ron, and with me is Dustin Brusnak. And that in the background barking is my dog, Olive. So I think I'll keep this short and sweet so you can get right to it. Today we're going to talk about prompt engineering. Is it dead? And also, there are gremlins in the machine. Look out. I think I might hear one in the background right now. So stay tuned. All right, before we get to our main topic today, let's talk about this fun little thing that we saw with, I think it was OpenAI I had a fun story about GPT-5.4. As they were qualifying it for release, there were gremlins. Now, just to be fair, software's, sometimes you talk about there's bugs in the system. We don't literally mean creepy crawlies. Although that's where it came from, because there were like butterflies in vacuum tube computers or moths or something, and they would short out the electronics and cause things to overheat. That's where the term came from. But sometimes you'll say colloquially, oh, there's a gremlin in your code. And that's just, you mean there's something weird going on, like a race condition or a mistake that you've made, and it's causing the software to misbehave. But on this case, there literally were gremlins. What?
Yes, literal, figurative gremlins anyway. So what had happened is OpenAI noticed when they were looking at, I believe, 5.2, one of the newer models, that it had a predisposition across all of the different modes to mention gremlins, but not just gremlins, goblins, dragons, unicorns, all sorts of fantasy stuff. Gremlins was just the number one, by 3 or 4 times more mentioned.
Wait, so like you might be talking about, what is this weird spot on my skin? And it would be like, that might be melanoma, but it looks like a mole. The gremlin in me says not to worry. Shit like
exactly. That. It would anecdotally mention gremlins. It wouldn't say like, it wouldn't be like birds are made of gremlins or gremlins made birds, but it would use it anecdotally. If I had to guess, there might be some gremlins in the machine or what have you. And over the course of training multiple models, they realized the gremlinness, if you will, of the model, when they went and measured it, was getting more gremlin-y rather than less.
I think they even had a graph, and they were like gremlins per 1,000 responses. Yeah. And it was going up.
It was like this. It was a linear increase in gremlins per model trained.
And so the models were getting progressively more obsessed with fantasy and gremlins and goblins. It's like in his free time, ChatGPT is playing D&D. Is that what's going on?
Yeah. So they had to invent new tools to analyze this. And what they found is, so if you remember back a few models ago, most of the frontier vendors added this feature where you could put it into sort of a different sort of mode of working with you. This came out of when ChatGPT 4 came out. There was this big backlash because it lost a bunch of its personality. And you remember that. It was a million years ago now in AI world. And so their fix for that was to have this drop down in the settings where you could say, I want this to be smart. I want this to be witty. I want this to be nerdy. And it turned out the nerdy one was pretty popular. A lot of people were using the nerdy one, enough that for whatever reason, when you go as a non-paying user, which is why we always recommend to pay, your model, your conversation is stored, and then ChatGPT uses that, OpenAI uses that to train the next version of the model. So there were all these nerdy conversations happening where this thing was predisposed to having nerdy output, mentioning things like fantasy creatures and D&D. And so then all of those conversations got fed back into the model over and over and over again.
When they do this, they even take the output from GPT
Oh, yeah.
as part of the training data, and then so it's like it's a snake eating its own tail.
This has been something they've done forever, recursive training. So they do know
Oh.
early last year, or maybe even late in 24, they ran out of stuff to train the models on.
Basically, all of human knowledge had been consumed already, and they're
they
like,
had
"Don't show me
purchased,
Plato. Don't show me Aristotle. That I know that stuff. I need
that's
something
old
new."
hat.
Wow.
They basically purchased and or stolen and or copied through fair use. Don't sue me. Yeah, all of the data that they could get. And so they started having the models go to town generating content for themselves and then feeding it conversations and video and all sorts of other stuff. So they actually cracked out and started feeding it images and all sorts of other stuff as well, because they ran out of stuff to train. And they found out it doesn't really matter. You can generate content, feed it content that's generated, and the model does get smarter, which was actually a pretty big innovation.
Hold on. I have an idea.
Uh-oh.
Okay. I would
I don't
say
like that
our conversation is pretty nerdy, right? And
That's
since
right.
they're slurping up everything, chances are the transcript, even the video and audio of this conversation, will be used for AI training in the future. So I want to introduce the next gremlin. And you know what it's going to be? Oboes. We just need to be like, yes, we're going to be like, oh, that new model is obotastic. And look at the oboes on that artificial intelligence skill you just wrote. So that in 6 months, they'll all be like, why is it talking about oboes all the time?
Oboes all the time. It's because Andy Ron did. Yeah. So if you can't get us to go into an oboe read startup, you're going to convert all the other startups into oboe read startups.
Yes.
This insidious.
Everyone's business plan will be like step 1, step 2, step 4 oboes, step 5 profit.
Step 4 oboes, and then the magic will happen.
Then
right?
the magic.
And then
oboe is the magic.
Oboe is the magic.
Sorry for our listeners if you don't realize I play the oboe, so hence my obsession with something obscure.
And for 20 years, Andy has been talking about building oboe reed based technologies.
But because oboe reads is like the bane of any oboist. You can Google it if you want to learn way too much about that. Okay, so Gremlins came in through the snake eating its tail business of retraining on its own output, and the free users liked their nerdy mode, and nerdy mode was like all into fantasy because it's correlated with the other good attributes of a nerd, which is those computers and those weird formulas and Excel, and also we love Dungeons and Dragons, and so we have our goblins and gremlins and
the nerd culture has taken over in a lot of ways, and we could have a whole different podcast on why I think that is. But I think they even shut the nerdy mode off, but the damage was already done.
Yeah. So how do they address that? Do they like put a filter in that's like take goblins out of all the training data?
So first it started with system prompting. So the prompt that they give it that you don't see, and that didn't kill it. And then they put counter incentives. So for the nerdy model, apparently what they were doing is, so when you train a model, it's very much like training an animal, where if it does something positive, you give it a cookie, right? And if it does something negative, you say, bad, don't do that, right? And the models very simplistically work on an incentive-based system. It's math-based, but it's the same thing. And so they had to counterweight. If you mention gremlins, we're not going to give you don't get your cookie. In fact, we might disincentivize you. And so over time, they trained it out of the models and they mellowed it out. So
I know it's interesting because I can imagine a situation where you're too specific with your limitations. And there could be still some fringe concepts that sneak in more than they should. Maybe armor class or two-hit roll or something.
You just have to look to Grok with the Mecha Hitler stuff, where Grok went off the rails and started literally identifying as Hitler about a year ago. And I think it was a similar thing where they weren't paying attention to the incentives that the model was being fed. And since you're getting data from everywhere, if you're like a social network that's feeding it, that might not go the way you think, right?
So if you have
ChatGPT is a lot mellower of a training set. But
so that same tendency to go into scaling loops could happen on a social network and in any direction. Grok had a similar problem. Basically, when you train with data from social networks, you're going to key off of all of kind of the extreme viewpoints that are in there. And if you train with that, means your AI could basically assume any personality that it saw, no matter how egregious or off mainstream it was, which is interesting, actually. Now, a lot of our clients aren't going to be training models because it costs millions and millions of dollars, but it is one of those it's one of those landmines around. You might think, oh, it might take the average. It won't become this extreme thing. It'll just do the average. So the viewpoints on this side will be offset by the viewpoints on the other side. But I guess that's not true. It actually becomes a schizophrenic thing, and it can, like, depending on what other tokens are in the prompt and in the conversation, it might key into one of those kind of personalities.
Yeah, this is where hallucinations come from, and this is where the context really can matter. As the conversation gets longer, it gets more and more esoteric because it's hitting more of the numbers inside of its sort of mind space that it has. And roughly, like, how these things are encoded and how they work under the hood. It's really interesting that even the people who are creating them don't fundamentally understand what's inside the model. The model is a black box once it's trained. So all they can do is, as they're training it, incentivize and disincentivize it. But how the numbers are encoded, no human mind can contact. We know the math is pretty simple that creates.
Yes, but it's like saying we understand the math of paints and then trying to explain to someone what a painting is. It's just colors on a grid, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, if that's how you were to think of painting, at least digital imagery, it's just a grid of colors. But inside of a model, you have all of the problem is doing these things literally trillions of times. Yeah. You're aggregating these weights trillions of times with the trillion parameter models, or Mythos is a 10 trillion parameter model. So no human being can really come anywhere near to conceptualizing what's happening. And so they can't just go in and remove the word gremlin, because by the time it's just a bunch of math on the inside, it's a bunch of numbers. And when someone talks about model weights, that really is the identity or the thought process of the model. And those are inscrutable, even to machines.
Well, because it gets distributed across billions of different, if you were liking it to a spreadsheet, the concept of gremlinness isn't just one cell in that spreadsheet that you could put a zero in. It's spread across all of the values in the spreadsheet and the relationships between those values, which is it's beyond our ability to.
And just like neurons and how knowledge is stored in the brain, right? It's the space in between the mathematical connections where a lot of this knowledge comes from. So it's not even really stored in the data. It's stored in how the data is fundamentally structured. And so you have to change and retrain the model. There's only so much you can do with prompting and prompt engineering.
Although I would argue there are some big differences in how the brain neurons work. So it's not just like that, because we have the ability.
It isn't,
to
but
learn.
For a layman's understanding,
right? But
these things came out of neural network research.
Sure. But I guess the one big difference is the neural relationships in LLM models are trained at great expense, billions of dollars, and tons of power and compute. And then those weights are fixed. So when you go to GPT 5.4, it's the same weights every time. Now, the system prompts, those other things that they feed in can change, but the weights themselves are changed. Whereas in biological systems, those weights are basically continually iterating. That's how human babies are able to learn so quickly, because those connections are forming, reforming. And so that is a difference. And that could be the future of LLM, is figuring out is there a way to make those things adaptive in digital networks.
Right, but at the same point, you don't want gremlinness to be introduced as a concept.
Right.
Slowly over time, it's going to be even less controllable.
I know. It's already a big problem with these, and that would make it more. Yeah.
And I think that the fixed model weights allow them to do things like weight them in hardware or make them more efficient, those sorts of things. And we're going to need those for the token economy that's coming for all of us, right? The idea of lowering the price of the models for everyone. But this gets us to
that's a fun
why
anecdote.
Prompting matters, right?
Although
context matters.
But first, before we go any further, many business owners that we talk to feel stuck between AI sounds important and I don't know where to start. That's exactly what we come in to help. If you want, and I mean you, not you, Dustin, I mean you, listener out there, clear, practical starting point, you can talk to us. Book a free 30-minute session at molo.now. We'll walk through your business and identify real opportunities. That's molo.now. All right, let's go back to the show. So you were saying,
You were
Dustin,
naturally meant to do ads. You had an alternative career, being a
I,
radio
honestly,
ad guy.
my radio voice can go into goofy voice way too easily. Are you interested in hearing Andy talk in goofy voice?
You could tell there was some theater background in
Yeah,
your,
but it's been a
history
while.
here.
But we do our best here.
All right, so
So
we were going to talk about how prompt engineering is dead. So that was kind
that's the highlight. And I think that's not too far from the truth. Clearly, we do have to still start with a prompt. But tell me, I don't know who's talking to here, Dustin, but I think 6 months ago, you used to go and deliver a talk on how to build prompts. And you had like a 10-point list of things you needed to do. And when you did that, you got better results out of AI.
right.
What was
my average prompt?
Yeah.
Was about 2 pages long. And I remember this would blow people's minds because most of us who are dealing with it, just without understanding how the models work and without spending time with them, we're just putting in what we consider pretty naive prompts. Tell me how to do, or write me a marketing email, right, about this. And that was the prompt. And what we found with the early versions of the model is prompt engineering is really engineering. And I remember as a software engineer coming in and going, that can't be. And then I really got into the technology and how it worked. And I was like, yeah, it really makes sense to spend a lot of time with these prompts, because if you don't, you get bad outcomes. And a lot of people's original, when they were forming their original conjecture of how AI worked and whether it was good or not, we're getting these terrible results and going, I don't see what the point is here. I don't see why we would use this. And a big chunk of what we did over the last couple of years, 24, 23, and early 25, was learn that how you tell the AI to give you an answer was incredibly important. And that required iterative engineering of what you were asking for. It required clear management of what kind of data you were feeding the system. And so a good prompt was more like 1 to 2 pages. And it started with something like, let's give it a conceptual identity. Like, you are a software engineer, an expert at this, and you have been, let's use a different one. You are a marketer, right? You are my marketing leader. You've been hired by me. I'm Dustin at Modern Logic. This is a little bit about my business. And your job is to provide concrete feedback on my marketing program. And then you would say, here's how you would do that. You would include step-by-step instructions. And then at the end, you would often include examples of what the output you wanted, and then end it with something like a little teaser, like, think step by step, or take a breath. And that, those little sentences would change.
You would type all that in before you even hit go on a conversation with ChatGPT?
No. See, here's the other secret is those of us who got really good at prompt engineering would create a prompt that would create prompts. And it turned out that LLMs were really good at manufacturing prompts that would then feed themselves in. And so the GPT or the project in Claude would interview you and ask you these details and then build a prompt, and then you would feed that prompt in. And that was actually a pretty quick way to generate prompts.
That sounds like low-hanging fruit for the vendors to be like, hey, people are using this tool in like a 2-stage fashion.
Yeah.
Why didn't they just build that in? And I guess the answer is, that's what they've done, I'm guessing. Because
I think part of it is, yes, the meta prompt, the system prompt, the one that Anthropic and OpenAI has gotten richer and provided more context so that you have to provide less. But I think in addition, the models we're dealing with today are so much smarter than the models that we were dealing with a year ago, that they do not need anywhere near as much. I haven't used my prompt generation GPT or project in 6 months. At least certainly not since Opus 4.6 came out in December, when we saw a major sea change in these things' intelligence.
I feel like this having to build a complicated prompt also predated thinking models. And thinking models, my understanding is that they basically are just a way of having a prompt model talk to itself. Do this, take that output, feed it back in a few times. And that's essentially what you were doing before, where you would ask the GPT first, help me build a prompt, and it would talk to you and whatever, and then give you the prompt, and then you copy and paste that into a fresh context. It does that in this thinking mode. It can do that on its own now. But the other thing I've seen that really has made prompting obsolete is okay, sure, sometimes you have a very complicated problem you're trying to solve, and you can't just one shot, say with one sentence, convey what it needs to know to solve that problem the way you want it solved. And what I've seen in coding, and I think this now applies to other disciplines too, you can speak to that in a second, is you can go to what's called plan mode. And so there, instead of me having to get the prompt right up front, it'll actually do that interview step as part of plan mode, and it actually generates a markdown file internally, but basically a text file, a script that it can refer to as it works on the problem, and goes back to that. And that way it keeps in front of mind, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Whereas I feel like without a plan, it might start to drift off as it starts to solve one aspect of the problem. It could potentially become obsessed with that aspect of the problem. Or when it solves that slice of the problem, it might feel like, okay, I'm done. And you would have to then go and say, okay, sure, you've picked the color of paint, but you need to now go to the store and buy the paint and get some brushes and come back and put up the ladder and actually paint the house.
Yeah.
With plan mode, it figures out, oh, those are all the steps. And after it does the first one, it goes back to the plan, and it doesn't stop until it's all the way through.
And you review the plan. And then, so we've seen a perfect storm of understanding and improvements in these systems. First of all, the LLMs have become smarter. Just underlying under the hood, the model weights have more data. They're more sophisticated at breaking things apart. They're more right more often. They hallucinate less. And then on top of that, what they've discovered is, yes, they've added plan mode, but to your point earlier, the reasoning model, they have spent the last year teaching these things to get good at what they call rule following. So the idea is, if you tell it, I want you to do this, then this, models prior to mid last year would basically skip steps or not do any of them. Now they are actually pretty good at going step by step. They very rarely miss steps. And when they do, they added that loop that you have where they're double checking themselves. And between the rule following improvements to the base model and the system prompts, and the ability to think iteratively and look at their own output, those two things turn out to be a really amazing way to create a much more sophisticated model. Now instead of talking about prompts that we're running as part of workflows, we start beginning to see what actual deployed agentic looks like, which is a loop around this core prompt where the AI is checking its output. And then on top of that, they added plan mode. So this is particularly part of Claude Code. So they're using a smarter version of the model that costs more money to build that plan, and then Sonnet, or one of the cheaper models, can then execute that plan. But they also went in and they added most of our tools now. When you look at the improvements that are done in Claude Cowork and in Claude Code and in Codex, those are the agentic harnesses. And what agentic harnesses do is they take the plan mode, the rule following, and the iterative loop, and they add a human controlled, effectively a system controlled loop on top of that allows it to continually verify its output before a human gets involved. So there's another loop on the outside. We used to call that the Ralph loop. And what they found, if you put those two things together, you end up with systems that can operate autonomously, sometimes for hours and hours without human input. And
that's really interesting.
This is really the innovation that they've come up in the last 3-4 months.
Well, this reminds me of something that we saw, which was, I think, OpenAI. Was it OpenAI or Anthropic who came up with oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the name. But basically, this new technology for running agentic, I believe. I think I call it Symphony. It was called Symphony for orchestration. And they used this as actually a proof of concept initially, and then they were having such luck with it, they actually had it rebuild itself using this tool. It was targeted towards coding, but it really could solve any
and this was OpenAI problem. Yeah.
And what was interesting is that, and here's the tool, they released it as open source. It's only Markdown. So basically it's like plain English. It is not source code. And they're like, if you want to run this tool, just feed this plan. It's a very detailed plan. It's probably 40 pages long. Feed this plan and specify, do you want it to run on Linux machines? Do you want Windows? Do you want it for a Mac? Do you want an iPhone app? Do you want it written in Swift or Rust or PHP? And they have tried all these things, and they say it gives you a working version no matter what you choose. And this is something I've been talking about for years, which is the next programming language is not going to look like the programming languages we have today. It's going to be a kind of English. Anyone can read it, but it will still take an expert in software to figure out what are the words you put in there, because it's very careful about how it specifies what it does and how it approaches problems and solves those problems. But that is the future.
And this
of
gets to
yeah.
And so what you end up with as a software system is those of us who are really working with AI day in, day out, we have a harness that's tuned to how we work. And a harness is just a tool we use to interact with AI. Could be Claude Code, could be Codex. But the key is we have trained our harness to work. My theory is each harness is like a fingerprint. Everyone has their own special sauce into the harness. And there's ways to do that as a company, and we can help with that. But like at the end of the day, I think there's going to be some tuning to make it work on your system the way you want. And what you have is you have these markdown, these English word files, basically, that are readable. And then you have intermediate artifacts. And those could be Python scripts. In my system, it's Python scripts. And what that does is you have the AI model write those Python scripts to do deterministic things. And that saves you on having to hit the model, having to have the model reason about stuff like moving files around.
Right. I mean,
but those are intermediate artifacts. I blow those away constantly.
But also I feel like that's our special sauce at Modern Logic. Sure, OpenAI is going to be like, the whole thing is just a markdown file and just have your AI rewrite the program. They'd love that if 10,000 people like paid for the tokens to recreate that. Whereas we're a little bit more pragmatic, which is I don't need to pay for the tokens to do the thing over and over.
Yeah, one of the common things I will do.
A straightforward script will do that.
Yeah, one of the common things I will do is after I do some work, I'm in Claude Code, I'm constantly, it literally, after it does something for me, prints out how many tokens I used, how much of my context I have available. So I'm constantly monitoring that. And I will then routinely say, okay, now that you've done all this work for me, what parts of it are deterministic? Take those deterministic parts and write me some Python scripts so that you don't have to hit the model again. And that gives me two things. One, it gets me lower context use, lower token use, cheaper. And Anthropic's Claude is the most expensive of the models out there right now. And so that doesn't mean that it's unaffordable, but you do want to make sure you're not using 30% of your tokens. The biggest thing for me is not the money. It's the fact that I run out of tokens by 4 p.m.
Yeah, but
so I will. But the other thing it gives you is deterministic validation. So you can write a script and you can say, now test the script and make sure that every time I do this, it gives me a validatable output. Whereas if you don't do that, the model might get updated or the model might see something different and behave differently tomorrow than it did today.
I feel like that whole how to actually build long-lasting systems is a future topic we could talk about.
It's a state of art. But back to this. So instead of doing prompt engineering, it's really common for my prompts now to be a couple of sentences in plan mode, and then I read and edit the plan, and then I execute the plan. So the plan mode is basically that GPT creator or that prompt creator. But the reality is even without plan mode, it is much more right now than it used to be. And that's because I'm spending most of my time doing this new skill, which is context engineering, which is eaten prompt engineering. And what context engineering is putting effectively for these harnesses, you put files on disk. The files are usually in Markdown because that's become weirdly the native language of AI. Markdown is just a nerdy shorthand format for documents.
It is actually interesting because it was a nerd's file format originally. It's not a Word doc, it's not a PDF, and it's not just like a note.
But it's really simple for a human to understand. Like 2 pounds or 3 pounds is a header. 2 pounds is a bigger header, and you can learn it in 5 minutes and start using it.
And it doesn't really matter. It's just words in a file with nothing else would work.
It could just be a text document. It's just Markdown gives us some other features like human readability and those sorts of things. And so what I have now is I have a system on disk that has here's a Claude.md, which is Claude is built to look at Claude.md first, and that's the system instructions. And that lays out here's all the files and where to find everything. And one of those files is here's who I am, here's who Modern Logic is, here's how to find additional data. And so now my system just by default knows those things.
But to be fair, one of the announcements Anthropic just came out with is easier access to update and handle memory And they're
Yeah.
building some of that in. And OpenAI has had it for a while. If you pay for OpenAI, it learns about your company and you and so forth. So I can even right now go into ChatGPT and say, tell me about my company. And it would know, oh, Modern Logic does these things and thus and such. But still having that explicitly written out is not a bad idea. And also, I just mentioned, we call out Claude MD, but all of the major models and
Have an
agentic
equivalent.
systems have their own, actually very similar pattern. It would probably just be in a different file name.
Yeah. So the other piece that's in these systems is you have this concept Claude introduced, I think, more than a year ago now, this idea of skills. And a skill is basically, think about training someone, a new person on the team. You're going to do this as part of your workday. A skill is basically that, but for AI. It's a plain text format that just describes the steps to do a specific thing. Sometimes there's tool use built into it, like tool use is just connecting to other software, like connect to Google, connect to my files on disk, etc. And so you take these, you start to think about your day and break it apart into, okay, I need a skill. Like here's a concrete example of a skill that I have is I have a to-do management system that I've built myself because I'm a productivity nerd. And I have a start day skill. And what that does is that goes and connects to my calendar. It goes and connects to my email. It goes and connects to my CRM. It pulls all of the things, my reminders app from Apple, pulls all the things into one spot so that I can look and say, what do I have to do today without going to 50 different locations, right? That's a really simple skill, but it's a 2-3 page skill that basically says, here's how I want the output to work. Here's what I care about. Here's make sure you don't lose anything. Here's how to do that. And so here's how to connect all of these things. And then I packaged all that up into a skill. And so at the beginning of the day, I just have to type run my start day skill, or if you're nerdy, /start day. And it just does that every single day, the same way every time. And now you're starting to get into building an agentic system that can work for you. You can even do things like schedule that skill to run at it before I get to my desk in a given day. And so now I'm starting to build out what AI means for me inside my organization. And I'm no longer prompting it. Prompts feel archaic because I'm not even giving it prompts in a lot of these cases. I'm just saying, do this skill. And the prompting was done months ago. It's just a reusable set of technologies that I'm using that work a lot more like software. So we're starting to begin to see the very exciting shape of what the future of work is going to look like with these tools. And it's really using them as augmentation for my day-to-day work. And it's not so much sweating every single prompt. It's trying to figure out how to boil things into reusable segments that the system can use. And then we at Modern Logic, we've shared certain skills with each other. We're working on shared skill repositories so that the skills can walk with the job role as opposed to walking with the person. Certainly, yeah. I'm not going to share my productivity system because that's definitely a fingerprint kind of system that works the way I do. It'd be different for you.
I would like to just clarify a few of these things. We've used the word skill on this podcast a lot, and only in re-listening to some of our previous episodes was I like, oh, I wasn't super clear. Like sometimes I'm just using skill as in like people have skills and AIs have skills. It's things they can do. And then there's what you were talking about, capital S skill, a markdown file on disk in the project folder you're working on, or a markdown file in a special folder for your whole system as a user. Those are a specific way of using the technology, like you would have Microsoft Word as a program that you would run to create a document. And then the other thing is, okay, skills happened, but rules were first. And rules, capital R rules, a similar thing. It is a special file in Markdown on your disk. And I was like, why would you use skills versus rules? It didn't make sense to me. And also some of the things you're talking about, like being able to reach out to our CRM and get things, or our task management system to get things. That's not actually specific to skills. That is a capability that we're providing the AI through tool use, either through an MCP or just a command line, which it could do without a skill. You could just have it talk to an agentic system like Claude Code, and it could do that if you gave it access. The reason we like to use capital S skills is because of context. And you want to have context stay focused, and there's a limited amount of context you can have. Even on the big models, we've talked before about as things get further back in history, they don't influence the behavior of the LLM as much as things that are in the forefront. And so skills are something that it can algorithmically engage and load into context when it needs to. So you can have
But
a
it
whole
doesn't
lot of
load the whole thing
skills.
in.
It
Yeah.
doesn't load them in. So you can have a whole lot of skills and they're not contaminating your context. Your context can stay focused on the thing you're doing right now, whereas rules are always dumped in. And so when you have a lot of rules, it muddies it. It doesn't know. Is it doing marketing
Can I
today?
get a
Is it
little
doing
nerdy
sales?
here?
Yeah.
Okay. So context, when we say context engineering, there's two things. There's context about you and your system. Those are usually files on disk with an agentic harness, the way we're using these things today. But when we talk about context with LLMs, what we're really talking about is the LLM has this idea of the conversation you are currently having. And that is called the context. And so when we talk about our context, you have to do when you're working with LLM is you load your context, the stuff that the context of the world you live in, into the LLM's context, which is really the conversation. And for most LLMs now, modern LLMs have 1 million token, roughly 1 million word context window. So they
That's
can
a lot of
only
words.
remember about 1 million words at once. But the key point here is there's been a ton of research that as that context fills up, 10, 20% accurate, 30, 40% little less accurate, 40, 50, 60% way less accurate. So you want to keep your context 60%-ish or under if you can. So you, of those million words, you only want to use about 500,000. And the other key is it uses a ton of those for its reasoning internally, for its system prompt. And so you could ask it 2 sentences, have it load a couple files on disk, and it could be 20% full.
And that's the other thing is like it's going to load in things as you get better about informing your LLM about your business and your customers and the problems at hand. It's going to read in lots of files from your computer, and those all turn into tokens that are filling up context.
And part of the skill, smallest skill, the skill we're learning when dealing with AI is explaining in that Claude MD or in the rules files, don't load this unless you need it. And that's the value of skills. Is it's something we've done in software engineering a ton, which is called encapsulation. You take a particular thing, you put it behind a very simple interface, and then it doesn't use it until it needs it. And that's what a skill is. It's an encapsulated set of programming that it only loads if it needs to. And similarly, you explain, don't load all this into memory when I just ask you a simple question. Only load what I need. Keep the
simple.
context low. And then if you're an Uber nerd like we are, you can manually clear your context between different, and that's the equivalent of what I used to tell people is when you have a new thing, open a new chat, right?
That's the easy way to do it.
That's the easy way to do that. And so what we're doing there is we are context engineering on disk to give these things more information, more skills, more tools to serve us. We're also context engineering in the machine's memory in the LLM to keep the context so that it doesn't have extraneous things. So the problem with LLMs is the more they weight the first thing you said about as much as the last thing you said. And so as you continue going on, it starts to get a little muddled about what's important because it doesn't have what humans naturally have, which is a recency bias, right? And they're trying to program recency bias into it to varying degrees of success.
I would say a tip that I will lean on is if you see the LLM start to have weird behaviors, like it didn't used to do this or that, that's a good reason to like maybe just open
or it won't stop referencing this thing.
Just open a new conversation with it. Now, we did mention earlier how they have memories, which is basically a rules file that's automatically managed by the LLM itself. And there is a way you can go in, probably just doing /memory or saying, hey, show me your memories. And it's possible those files could get contaminated with things you don't want. And so you
inside
may
the
have to,
desktop
from
apps,
time to time,
in settings.
Go in and actually look at those and review and edit those. And that might be a way that if suddenly it's got a new behavior you don't like, that could be where
I'm nerdy that way. I actually wish it didn't have encoded memories. I wish I could have complete control of the system because oftentimes, so like I use an agentic browser called Dia and it has its own memories and I haven't gotten edited in a while. So it knows I'm the CEO of Modern Logic, but what it started doing is producing these executive briefs on any search that I give it, right?
Oh, wow.
And some of them are great, but it's as a CEO, here's the fundamental takeaway. And my favorite was, here's the executive brief on the ROI of cats and dogs, and it started talking about how cats were great ROI and how they have low infrastructure costs. And I'm like, you have gone too far. I am literally just asking what the genetic origin of the modern feline is, and it's giving me a summary of the ROI value of a cat
honestly,
or dog.
this is another reason to separate your personal and work stuff from these models, because I haven't gotten bitten by it yet, but I do run a Dungeons and Dragons game on Mondays, and sometimes I'll just do a quick D&D question in ChatGPT, and then see I'm logged in on my work account, and I'm like,
oh no,
here come the gremlins.
Here comes the gremlins. Yeah, exactly. So this context engineering. When we talk about hiring people and looking for people to develop AI skills, this is what we're talking about. And it might sound complex to someone who isn't doing this, but the reality, I think, is getting up to date on this for a moderately savvy computer user is a couple weeks of work, really.
Also, this is the skills that, like, if you're in school right now, this is not something you're going to learn because your teachers don't know this stuff yet. And the curriculum doesn't have this stuff yet. We have to all bootstrap and figure it out on our own. But I feel like this is going to be critical. If they're not asking this in job interviews now, they're going to be soon, because this is how work will be done in the future. And it doesn't make sense to hire someone who can't take advantage of these tools. And I'm a firm believer that the future of work involves human beings, but the shape of that work is changing. And so
it's very similar, I think, to when the personal computer came out. And it just was obvious to people in the 80s that and internet, same thing. It was just obvious to all of us that the way we were going to do work has fundamentally changed. And I do think there's a little bit more disruption with LLMs because they're a little bit more human-esque.
I think it is because, but also it's much easier to displace, I think, knowledge workers because there's not like the fixed capital cost. With a lot of other industries, there are machines, there are trucks. If you think about, will AI take over long haul trucking? We already own, collectively, we in the nation own all of these trucks that don't have that capability. And that's a big financial investment. So we're not going to turn that over overnight, but maybe sure over the next 30 years, if a new autonomous long haul truck is invented, they might phase in. But think about call centers, there's not that same infrastructure. So,
and when was the last time you called a call center and had a delightful experience?
No,
like,
and
if you called a call center and replaced the person on the other end who's having a bad day, who is just reading from a script with an AI, it might be a better experience for some.
Although the AIs they use right now aren't particularly good, and it's like super frustrating. Like I end up saying, I talk to an agent, talk to an agent, talk to an agent. And then,
but there's a lot of experiences I've had with call centers where I would prefer a computer because what I'm asking for is relatively simple. And now I have to go through all this rigmarole where they're trying to upsell me and I'm on hold. And it's just,
in terms of that lots economic
of transactional.
Force, just in terms of that economic force, I think that those kinds of knowledge worker things could be more rapidly adopted and thus be a bigger disruption. But anyway, that's a whole topic on its own we can discuss another day. I think the prompt is dead. We've nailed that conversation, not because you don't have to interact with them anymore, but because the way we interact with LLMs is much more nuanced and there's better levers to pull than just that initial prompt.
Yeah, we're getting more sophisticated. We're getting a more sophisticated set of tools that require more sophistication and knowledge. And what excites me about the future is anytime, if these things were just smart enough that you could just talk to them in 2 sentences and they could do your whole job, like that would be really problematic. But the reality is there are skills, smallest skills to learn. There's education to be done. There's techniques you can learn that make you really good at using these tools. And those what I'm seeing is the depth of that knowledge went from like this to like this over the last 6 months. And so what that means is that those of us who want to learn this technology, who are excited about it, there's going to be room in the new economy for people that understand this stuff. And so my encouragement when I go talk to people is get ahead of this, because this is a really fun technology to play with. And yes, there are implications for it, but if you want to live in the new world and succeed, there is going to be space for people that are really good at that have this set of skills and knowledge. Educating yourself early, getting in early is a great way to take advantage of that.
Yep. I think that was a really fun conversation. I think we could probably say that's enough for one day. We'll have another one in a couple weeks, so stay tuned, folks out there. Thanks for joining us today. You know what? If you're exploring AI, and honestly you should be, if you're listening to us, you probably are, you might have something specific you want to solve. And the best next step in that case is just talk to us. You can schedule a free 30-minute session with Dustin or myself right now. Go to molo.now. That's MOLO.NOW. NOW, it's .com or .org. It's one of those top-level domains. So you just type MOLO.NOW in your browser, and you will be taken to a page where you can book a meeting with us right there. It's very easy and quick, and we'd love to talk to you. Also, there's a feedback form on our website, or you can email us. Tell us what you want to hear on this podcast. We'd love to hear your questions. You can go to modernlogic.io/podcast. Also, you'll find links there where you can follow us, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. We do it all. Our show is produced and edited by Ryan Peterson. Additional contributors include Dylan Brusnak, Anna Spitz, and Beth Davis. Our AI mascot was created by the artist Becca Braun. Our theme music is Elastic Vibe by Ziv Lauren. If you find this show useful, please share it with someone who we think would benefit. It really helps us to grow our audience. And what also helps is if you could rate and review. We'd love it. Thanks so much. Modern Logic for Your Business is a production of Modern Logic.